I remember the exact shade of blue in my daughter Ilara's eyes the day she learned to ride her bicycle. It was the color of a summer sky just after dawn, full of unfiltered hope. When she finally pedaled 20 feet on her own, she'd turned back to me, and that brilliant blue was a light with a trust so pure it could have powered a city. It was the look that said, "My father is here, so nothing can truly go wrong." I saw that same shade of blue tonight, across the polished table at the alabaster room, but the light behind it was gone. It was the blue of a deep, cold lake, hiding whatever was moving in the depths. Why did the color that once promised faith now make my 68-year-old heart feel like it was treading dangerous water? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. The restaurant was a cathedral of quiet success. Low golden light fractured into rainbows on my water glass, and the murmur of other lives was a gentle hum. It was the perfect place to celebrate the end of my life's work. $58 million. The number still felt like a zip code, not a measure of the 45 years I'd spent building an empire from a rented garage. I did it all for the girl sitting across from me, the one who now looked at her husband, Leo, with an adoration that felt rehearsed. Leo wore his expensive suit like a second skin. His smile was a weapon of practiced charm, but his eyes never settled. They were always scanning, assessing, calculating. He'd helped me navigate the sale of the company, and he had, piece by piece, replaced my daughter's sky blue gaze with something I no longer recognized. He raised his glass. "To William," he said, his voice smooth and resonant. "To the man who built it all, we are all so incredibly proud of you." Ilara echoed him, her smile bright. "To Dad, now you can finally rest, just peace." The words were kind, but they landed like small cold stones in my gut. Rest. Peace. It sounded less like a reward and more like a eulogy, as if my utility expired the moment the wire transfer cleared. I had spent my life as a shark, always moving. The idea of rest felt like death. "Thank you," I said, the smile cracking on my face. "It means the world to have you both here." Leo took a sip of his wine. "Of course. This secures the family's future. It changes everything for our children, and their children." I watched Ilara's face. She nodded, but her eyes flickered toward me for a fraction of a second. Guilt? Or was it an apology? "Do you think I was being too sensitive, or can you feel it when the people you love start seeing you as a legacy instead of a person?" The conversation drifted to their plans. A new house, a portfolio for Leo to manage, a charitable foundation in my name. I felt like a ghost at my own victory dinner, watching my life's work being repurposed into a currency for a life I didn't understand. Then, the orchestra began to play a slow waltz. Leo stood, extending a hand to Ilara. "My love," he said, dripping with performative romance. "May I have this dance?" As they walked to the dance floor, a profound loneliness hit me. My late wife, Eleanor, had loved to dance with me in our kitchen, clumsy and laughing. I promised her on her deathbed that I would always protect our little girl. I looked out at the dance floor and saw Ilara in another man's arms. Leo leaned in, whispering in her ear. I watched her posture shift, a subtle stiffening of her spine. She turned her head slightly, her eyes finding mine across the room. For a single, terrifying second, the warm, familial mask dropped entirely. I saw something naked and cold beneath it. It was the look of a strategist, a partner in a calculated venture. The hopeful blue of her childhood was gone, replaced by the chilling clarity of ice. In that one frozen moment, I understood the person I was here to celebrate with was not my daughter, but a stranger waiting for me to leave the stage. The orchestra's final note hung in the air, and the polite applause was a distant, muffled sound. As Ilara and Leo walked back to the table, a young waiter appeared at my elbow, so silent I barely registered him. He leaned in, pretending to clear a plate, and his whisper was a thread of sound so thin and sharp it pierced the fog of my thoughts. "Sir," he breathed, his eyes fixed on the plate, his voice trembling. "Forgive me. I know it's not my place, but I saw him. Your son-in-law." My blood went cold, a slow, creeping chill that turned my limbs to lead. The sounds of the restaurant collapsed into a single, low hum of pure dread. "When he stood up to dance," the boy whispered, "he shielded your glass with his menu. I saw him drop a small white powder in your drink." He straightened up abruptly and vanished back into the clockwork of the restaurant, leaving me alone with his words hanging in the air like poison gas. My eyes fell to the glass of water beside my plate. It looked so innocent, but now it was a snake coiled in the heart of paradise. Leo and Alara were approaching, their faces wreathed in smiles. Leo pulled out Alara's chair. "Did you enjoy the music, Dad?" she asked, her voice as smooth as a still lake. And I finally understood. The coldness I'd seen in her eyes wasn't just ambition. It was a void where a conscience should have been. "What would you have done? Scream for the manager? Accuse your own daughter? Or play their game knowing one wrong move could be your last?" I forced a smile. "It was lovely," I said, the words tasting like ash. My heart was a frantic drum, but my hands on the table were perfectly still. 45 years of high-stakes negotiations taught me one thing: never let them see you sweat. Leo sat down. "Well, you've certainly earned a lifetime of fine wine," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. He gestured toward my water glass. "You should hydrate. It's important." The quiet menace was breathtaking. They were waiting for me to take a sip, waiting for the old man to finally get out of the way. I saw the horrifying blueprint. With me gone, Leo's power of attorney would give him unfettered access to every dime. My death wasn't a tragedy. It was a liquidity event. I needed a plan. I couldn't just leave the glass untouched. That would signal suspicion. My eyes scanned the table and landed on the large, ornate potted fern beside us, its fronds cascading to the floor. It was my only ally. I steered the conversation to the future. "You know," I said, my voice deliberately weaker, "it's time for me to step back. You two should be the face of the family now." I saw a flicker of triumph in Leo's eyes. He thought he'd won. Alara placed her hand on mine, her skin cool. "We'll make you proud, Dad," she lied. I picked up my knife, and with the feigned clumsiness of an old man, I let my hand twitch, knocking the heavy water goblet. I guided its fall, directing the entire contents, water, ice, and poison, in a silent cascade into the soil of the fern. It was over in 2 seconds. "My apologies," I laughed, dabbing at the floor. "My hands aren't what they used to be." Leo's smile tightened. He knew the opportunity was lost. I pushed my chair back and stood slowly. "It's been a wonderful evening," I said, my voice calm, "but I'm tired. It's time to go." Confusion clouded their faces. "Dad, so soon?" Alara asked, her composure finally cracking. "We haven't even had dessert." I looked at the stranger wearing my daughter's face. "I think I've had enough for one evening." As I walked past Alara's chair, my cufflink snagged the strap of her clutch purse. It fell, spilling its contents across the carpet. A lipstick, a mirror, and nestled next to them, a tiny amber glass vial. It was empty. Seeing that tiny empty vial on the floor wasn't just a shock. It was a detonation. It blew a hole through 40 years of memories, twisting every cherished moment with my daughter into something monstrous. Was her love just another asset to be managed and eventually liquidated? I didn't say a word. I bent down, my knees cracking, and picked up the vial. My calloused fingers felt clumsy around the delicate glass. I held it up to the light, empty, clean, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The cold glass was a small, hard point against my chest. I placed her lipstick and mirror back on the table and walked away. The walk through the restaurant was the longest of my life. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning points of confusion and rising panic. Outside, the cool city air was a welcome anchor to reality. I didn't go home to the large empty house that now felt like a museum of my own foolishness. I drove downtown, to the small brick building where it had all started. My first office. I still owned it, a piece of sentimental real estate I could never sell. I let myself in with an old key. The air inside smelled of old paper and stale coffee, the scent of my own history. In the dim glow of the streetlights, I saw my old desk, covered in a thin layer of dust. This was real. The work, the struggle. It was all real. I opened a groaning filing cabinet and pulled out a small wooden box from the back. Inside was a photograph of my wife Eleanor and a 7-year-old Alara, her face full of uncomplicated love. The grief hit me then. A physical wave. I had promised Eleanor I would protect our girl. I had failed. In my blind determination to give her a world without sharp edges, I had handed her to a man who was nothing but sharp edges, and somehow she had become one too. The grief burned away, replaced by something colder, harder. A resolve was forming in my gut, solidifying like cooling steel. The promise I made wasn't just to provide, it was to protect. And sometimes, protection means fighting a war. I had the vial, but it was my word against theirs. They would paint me as a confused, senile old man. I needed more. I needed leverage. I needed to know everything. As I sat there in the quiet dark of my past, planning my first move, a jarring vibration ripped through the silence. My phone, left on the desk, lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 3 years, a name from a part of my life I thought was long over. It was Marcus, the former head of security at my company, the man I'd hired 30 years ago to handle the things that couldn't be solved in a boardroom. Why was he calling me, tonight of all nights? The name Marcus on the screen burned a hole in the darkness. He was a ghost from a life of union strikes and corporate espionage I thought I'd left behind. His voice, when I answered, was the same low gravel I remembered. "William," he said, no small talk. "I saw the news, the sale. Congratulations." There was no warmth in it. "But I have a feeling your celebration was cut short tonight." How could he know? "This isn't a random call," he continued. "I should have made this call 3 years ago." 3 years. The words echoed in the silent office. Long before the sale was ever a consideration. The quiet dread I'd felt at the restaurant was a shallow pond compared to the cold, black ocean opening up beneath me now. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" I asked. I could hear him take a weary breath. "It was just after your health scare. Leo came to see me. Said he was concerned about you, about the company's security. He asked about your habits, your routines, the codes for your home, your personal safe." Each word was a hammer blow. I had assumed Leo's questions back then were born of concern, the dutiful son-in-law worried about his family's patriarch. "He was testing me," Marcus continued, his voice layered with cold fury. "He wanted to know if my loyalty was to you or to money. He talked about how old leadership sometimes needs to make way for new vision. He was asking in 1,000 different ways if I could be bought. Leo hadn't just been planning for my eventual decline, he had been actively trying to recruit my own chief of security to help orchestrate it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded, anger breaking through the shock. "Why not 3 years ago?" There was a long pause. "Because I had no proof," he said, his voice raw with regret. "It was his word against mine. To come to you then, it would have destroyed your family. I told him to go to hell and thought that was the end of it. But when I saw the news of the sale, 58 million, I knew he wouldn't stop. I knew he would try again. And tonight, he had." "It's worse than you think, Marcus," I whispered. "He did try again. Tonight, with Alara's help." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. "I believe you," he finally said. "And I did one thing right. I didn't trust him. The day after he came to my office, I documented everything, dated it. and had it notarized. But I did something else, William. I leaned forward, my heartbeat thrumming in my ears. What did you do? His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. My office had voice-activated audio recording. I never told him it was on. I have him, William. I have his voice on a digital file. I have every single word. Proof. It was more than leverage. It was a weapon. Where is it? I asked, my voice shaking with a new, dangerous energy. It's safe, Marcus said. In your retirement gift, the scale model of the first factory. There's a felt panel on the bottom. Pry it off. You'll find a USB drive inside with everything. I was already planning my next move, but a final horrifying thought struck me. Marcus, I said slowly, if you recorded him, there would be a visitor log, security footage. The line went silent. That's the thing, William, he said, his voice heavy. He didn't need to be logged in. He didn't come as a visitor. He paused, letting the truth land with the force of a physical blow. Ilara brought him. She used her family access card and escorted him directly to my office. Ilara brought him. The words didn't just echo in the silent office, they soaked into the very walls, staining the air with a truth so corrosive it felt like it could peel the paint. It wasn't Leo's betrayal that was the killing blow. It was my daughter's. A son-in-law's greed is a common, ugly story, but a daughter leading her husband to a meeting to conspire against her own father, that is a wound of a different kind. It's a primal wound. It rewrites your entire history. Marcus's final revelation was the keystone that locked all the other horrifying pieces into place. It proved this wasn't a recent plot born of the $58 million windfall. This was a deep-seated, calculated ambition that had been growing in the dark for years, nurtured by my own child. The sky-blue eyes I so loved hadn't just gone cold recently. They had been deceiving me for a very, very long time. I ended the call with Marcus, a quiet promise to be in touch passing between us. Then I sat in the darkness, not in grief anymore, but in a state of absolute, chilling clarity. The man who had walked out of the alabaster room an hour ago was gone. He was a victim, a confused old man reeling from shock. The man sitting in this dusty chair now was someone else entirely. He was a strategist. He was a fighter. He was the man who had built an empire from nothing, and he was remembering with every cold breath exactly how he had done it. Do you believe there's a line that once crossed a person can never come back from? For me, hearing that Ilara had personally escorted her husband on his mission of betrayal was that line. I drove home. Not to the front door, where security cameras Leo had insisted on installing for my safety, would record my arrival. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, slipping through the back gate and entering through the garden doors, a set of old French doors whose lock I knew could be jiggled open with a credit card, a flaw I'd always meant to fix. Now, I was grateful for my own negligence. The house was silent and dark. It felt alien, a grand, hollow shell that no longer belonged to me. Every family photo on the walls seemed to mock me, a gallery of lies I had lovingly curated. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, my feet silent on the thick Persian rugs. The air was still, holding the faint, cloying scent of Ilara's perfume from her last visit. I went straight to my office. The bronze model of the factory sat on the credenza, exactly where it had been for years, a testament to my life's work. Now it was something more. It was an arsenal. My hands were surprisingly steady as I lifted the heavy model and placed it on my desk. I ran my fingers along the bottom, feeling for the edge of the felt panel Marcus had described. It was there, perfectly flush. Using the edge of my old letter opener, I pried it off. Inside the hollow compartment, just as he'd said, was a small black USB drive. I held it in the palm of my hand. It was no bigger than a key, but it held the power to detonate 2 lives, to expose a rot that went to the very bone of my family. I slipped it into my pocket, a cold, hard promise against my leg. My first instinct was to call my lawyer, to release the hounds and let the justice system tear them apart. But I stopped myself. What would that accomplish? A public, messy trial. Headlines. The name I had spent a lifetime building would be dragged through the mud, forever associated with scandal and a sordid family squabble. They would paint me as a vindictive, senile old man. And Alara, she was still my daughter. As much as my heart wanted to deny it, she was still the little girl with the scraped knee and the trusting blue eyes. Was my goal justice, or was it something more? I realized, standing there in the suffocating silence of my own home, that what I wanted wasn't just to punish them. I wanted them to understand the full scope of their failure. I wanted to dismantle their world, not with the brute force of the law, but with the quiet, devastating precision of a surgeon. I wanted to take away not just the money they craved, but the very foundation of power they thought they had secured, the foundation I had given them. I went to my desk and turned on my computer. Leo was brilliant. I'd give him that. He was a master of financial instruments, of shell corporations and offshore accounts. He had structured the sale of my company through a series of complex trusts and holding companies designed to be impenetrable. He had walked me through it all, and at the time, I had admired his genius, believing he was protecting my legacy. Now I saw it for what it was, a cage he had built around my fortune, a cage to which he and Alara held the only keys. Or so he thought. What Leo, in all his Ivy League brilliance, had never understood was me. He saw an old man who built things out of steel, a relic of an analog age. He didn't understand that the same mind that could visualize a factory floor in 3 dimensions could also see the architecture of a financial trap. For the last 6 months, while he was busy building his cage, I had been building my own, quietly, in the background. My oldest friend and personal lawyer, a man named Samuel, who had been with me since the garage days, had helped me draft a series of covenants and fail-safes into the very trust documents Leo himself had prepared. Leo thought the key to the entire $58 million trust was a single irrevocable clause naming Alara as the sole heir, and him as the trustee. But Samuel and I had embedded a dormant codicil, a moral turpitude clause. It was an old-fashioned, almost arcane piece of legal language that was so obscure we knew Leo's modern sensibilities would dismiss it as sentimental fluff. The clause stated that if the trustee or the beneficiary were ever found to have acted in a manner that was grossly negligent, criminally malicious, or fundamentally antithetical to the stated values of the grantor, control of the entire trust would immediately revert to a secondary party. Leo assumed that secondary party was a distant charity, a standard legal placeholder. But it wasn't. The secondary party, named in a sealed addendum held by Samuel, was Marcus. The one man I knew Leo had tried and failed to corrupt. My loyalty had been tested, and so had his. Marcus had passed. Leo had failed. My plan was simple. I didn't need to play the recording for the world. I only needed to play it for one person, the chairman of the board of the private bank that held the trust, a man I had known for 30 years, a man who valued integrity and reputation above all else. The recording, along with Marcus's notarized statement, was all the proof he would need to invoke the clause. I wouldn't be destroying them with a public accusation. I would be disinheriting them with a quiet phone call. Their empire would vanish overnight, the funds frozen and transferred before they even knew what had happened. They wouldn't be criminals. They would just be nothing, powerless, broke, left with nothing but the ashes of their own greed. I began to type an email to Samuel, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The path forward was clear, the strategy set. And as I wrote, a small, sad smile touched my lips. Leo had called me an old tree that needed to be cleared away. He was about to learn a very old lesson. It's not the storm that brings down the forest. It's the rot that starts from within. Just as I was about to attach a placeholder file to the email, a sound from downstairs made me freeze. It was the soft, almost inaudible click of the front door opening and closing. They were here. They had come back. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was ice cold. I looked at the clock. It was almost 2 a.m. This wasn't a social call. This wasn't an apology. This was something else. I stood up and walked silently to my office door, locking it with a quiet snick of the deadbolt. Then I moved to the window that overlooked the long, circular driveway. A car was parked there, Leo's sleek silver sports car, its engine silent. But as I watched, another figure emerged from the passenger side, a man I didn't recognize, dressed in dark clothing, and in his hand, I saw the glint of moonlight on something long and metallic. It was a crowbar. The sight of the crowbar wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. A final, ugly period at the end of a sentence I had been trying not to read. This was the moment the mask didn't just slip. It was torn off and thrown to the ground. The thin veneer of civility, of family, was gone. Tonight was never about just the poison. That was plan A, the quiet, tidy solution. The crowbar was plan B, the messy one. I watched from the darkness of my office window as Leo and the stranger moved toward the house. There was no hesitation in their steps. They moved with a predatory purpose, two sharks closing in. A part of me, a deep primal part, screamed to call the police. It was the logical thing to do, the sane thing. But my hand hovering over the phone didn't move. A police intervention would mean sirens, reports, questions. It would mean the story would be told by others, filtered through legal jargon and newspaper headlines. No. This story, my story, would end on my terms. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclamation. My mind, honed by decades of solving impossible problems under immense pressure, became a whirlwind of tactical thought. They would expect me to be in my bedroom asleep. They wouldn't expect me to be here, in my office, awake and waiting. My office was my fortress. Heavy oak door, a solid deadbolt. But they had a crowbar. It wouldn't hold them for long. I needed a better advantage. What would you do, cornered in your own home by people who want you gone? Do you hide and hope, or do you turn the tables and make them regret ever stepping through your door? I looked around the room, not at the memories, but at the assets. The heavy bronze model of the factory, the marble bust of my own father that served as a paperweight, the letter opener, cold and sharp in my hand. But my eyes landed on the fireplace. Beside it was a set of heavy cast-iron fireplace tools. Among them, a long, thick poker, its end forged into a sharp, hooked point. It felt heavy and balanced in my hand. A tool for building a fire, now a tool for fighting one. I heard the splintering crack of wood from downstairs. The front door. They were in. My heart was a steady, cold drum. The fear was gone, burned away by a white-hot, righteous anger. This was my home. They were not just trying to take my money. They were trying to erase my existence. I would not be erased. I moved away from the door and positioned myself in the darkest corner of the room, behind my large leather armchair, the iron poker held ready at my side. The house's alarm system, which Leo had so thoughtfully updated, remained silent. Of course, he would have the master codes. He had thought of everything. Everything except the one variable he could never calculate. What a man will do when he has absolutely nothing left to lose. I heard their footsteps on the grand staircase, slow and deliberate. They were trying to be quiet, but the old house groaned under their weight. Then, a whispered conversation outside my office door. "The bedroom's empty," Leo's voice, a low hiss of frustration. "He must be in here. Check the lock." A metallic scrape against the keyhole. Then, the dull thud of a shoulder against the oak. It held. Another thud, harder this time. The wood groaned. The third strike was a violent crack, and the door jamb splintered. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. Leo stood in the doorway, a small, elegant pistol in his hand, a stark contrast to the brutish crowbar held by his companion. For a moment, they saw an empty room, bathed in the pale glow of the computer monitor. "Where is he?" the stranger growled. "Find him," Leo commanded, his voice tight with an ugly mix of fear and greed. "He couldn't have gone far." As the stranger stepped into the room, his back to me, I moved. I was not a young man, but adrenaline is a powerful fuel. I brought the iron poker down with all the force I could muster, not on his head, but on the wrist of the hand holding the crowbar. The sound was a sickening, wet crack of bone, and the man screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. The crowbar clattered to the floor. Leo spun around, his eyes wide with shock, and raised the pistol. But he was too late. Before he could aim, I lunged, not at him, but at the heavy oak desk beside him. With a roar that came from the very pit of my soul, I shoved it with all my strength. The desk, laden with books and my heavy computer, slid across the polished floor and slammed into Leo's legs, pinning him against the wall. The pistol flew from his hand, skittering into the darkness under the credenza. It was over in 5 seconds. The stranger was on the floor, clutching his shattered wrist, moaning in pain. Leo was trapped, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The power in the room had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I stepped out of the shadows, the iron poker held loosely in my hand, its hooked tip pointing directly at Leo's throat. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were finally looking at me. Not at a legacy, not at a number in a bank account, but at the man he had tried to destroy. And for the first time, I saw genuine fear in them. The front door was still broken, hanging open to the night, and in the distance, I could hear the faint, approaching wail of a siren. I had made one silent call after all, just before they broke down the door. Not to the police, but to Marcus. He'd only needed one word from me. Now. I knew he would handle the rest. I looked down at Leo, my son-in-law, the architect of my ruin, and I felt a profound, aching pity. He had gambled everything on my weakness and had never once considered my strength. He had built a flawless plan but had failed to understand his opponent. "It's over, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire terrible night. At that moment, the office door creaked and a figure appeared, silhouetted against the hallway light. It was Alara. She must have been waiting in the car. Her face was pale, her beautiful features contorted in horror at the scene before her husband trapped, a stranger writhing on the floor, and her father, standing over them both like a vengeful god from an old story. Her sky-blue eyes, now wide with panic, met mine. The cold, strategic mask was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. The sirens were louder now, closer. Red and blue lights began to flash and dance across the walls of my office. Alara looked from me to Leo, then back to me, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to speak, to explain, to bargain. But there were no words left. We both knew the truth. I had given her a world without consequences, and she had mistaken it for a world without rules. The final lesson, the one I had failed to teach her my entire life, was about to begin. The most valuable things a person can build, trust, family, love, are the easiest things to destroy, and once they are gone, no amount of money in the world can ever buy them back. As the first uniformed officers appeared in the doorway, their weapons drawn, I did not look at them. I looked at my daughter. I wanted her to see my face, to see the end of the story she had helped write. Then I let the iron poker fall from my hand. It hit the wooden floor with a final echoing clang.